Good morning, guys. Welcome to lesson 5.09, the cluster sample. Today's aim is how can we draw samples from a population using a cluster sampling method. Before you continue today's lesson, please know that I have posted some exemplar responses from the graded assignment. Those of you that haven't done it, this will be a good chance to see some really good student designed work. Um, those of you that have completed it, you can compare yours to those posted examples to see where you could have improved yours. Getting into today's lesson. So the do now, I'm going to want you guys to answer the following questions in your form. You want to figure out what percentage of students in the 12th grade do not take public transportation to school every day. You decide to take a random sample of 20 students to find out. Would you use a simple random sample or a stratified sample? Why did you use this method? So take a minute or two to do that. When you finish in the Google form, come back here to review your answers. All right, so reviewing. So based on this situation, you're going to use a simple random sample. You're going to use a simple random sample because in this particular situation, there is no mention of any strata. You are simply taking a sample of 20 seniors from the population of the 12th grade, and there's no indication that the difference between male and female is significant enough to break it into a group. So now let's talk about today's lesson, which is a cluster sample. So a sampling method in which a population is broken into clusters that represent the entire population. So some examples can include cars on a subway, schools within a district, teams within a league. You're probably thinking to yourself, this seems very similar to a stratified sample, and there is some similarities, but what you'll see in a moment is that they are in fact very different. Because to conduct a sample cluster, first we must divide the sample population into clusters, then randomly select clusters, and then we sample every individual in that cluster. So that is very different, especially those last two steps. So let's compare it to a stratified because this is the most common error that occurs. So first, let's talk about the population, right? So in a stratified sample, we're broken into homogeneous groups called strata. In a cluster, we are broken into groups called clusters that are representative of the population. Now, my the best way to be to describe this, right, would be if we're sampling, let's say, a school district in the city, right? Stratified may break all the students in that district into a group that makes sense because they're singular in some characteristic. So you may break them into grade levels. So then all the sophomores in the district, all the juniors in the district, all the seniors in the district, all the freshmen in the district. Those would be your four groups. With the cluster, the groups are being broken into representative groups. So in this case, the cluster may be the one school. Say there's 10 schools in the district. So that's your 10 clusters right there. Now, your groups, what happens? Well, we take random samples from each strata representative to the population. So if it was a district and it was 25% sophomores, 25% freshmen, 25% juniors, 25% seniors, that's what your sample would be. 25% sophomores, 25% freshmen, 25% seniors, 25% juniors. With a cluster sample, going back to our example of the 10 schools in the district, you would take, let's say, two clusters. So you'd select two schools and you'd sample every student in that school. So now let's look at this example. Mr. Rubin wants to survey his students to determine the feelings on remote learning. He teaches 140 students with 28 in period 2, 23 in period 4, 32 in period 5, 32 in period 6, and 25 in period 8. He wants to sample at least 20 students. So with the stratified, first thing we'll do is we'll break them into stratas. In this case, we're going to break them into the 5 class periods. There's 20% of all his students in period 2. So his sample will be randomly selected 20% from period 2. There's about 16% of his students in period 3. So he will randomly select 16% of his students from period 3. He will repeat this process for all 5 classes. So whatever percent of total students are in period 5, that's the percent of my sample that'll be from period 5. Whatever percent of total students is from period 6, that'll be the percent of students in my sample. And whatever the percent of students in period 8, that same percentage will be the students of period 8 in my sample. With cluster now, right, we'll break them into clusters. In this case, we'll use the same 5 class periods. So sometimes your strata and clusters could be the same thing, other times they're different. But then what I'll do is rather than pick from a little from all, I will take all from one class. So I will randomly select one out of my 5 classes and then survey every student in the class. And that's the big way of thinking of it. Stratified is sum of all. It's sum samples from all groups. Cluster sample is all of some. So all samples of some groups. So now what I would like you guys to do is proceed to your guided practice. When you're done, come back to the next slides and review your answers. All right, so let's look at the guided practice example. So we want to find out the average height of a high school basketball player in the PSAL. There are currently 300 teams in the PSAL and each team has 20 players. So what would the clusters be in this case? Well, in this case, you'd want each team to be a cluster. And what you will do to randomly select your clusters is you'll assign each a random number, 1 to 300, because there are 300 teams. Randomly select numbers to be that clusters. We do not accept duplicates. Reason being is we don't want to sample the same team twice. And then, if we want to sample 100 students, how many clusters do we need? Well, under the assumption that there are 20 players per team, if we want 100 students, we would need to select 5 clusters, or in this case, 5 student teams. All right, that's all for today, guys. If you have any questions, please reach out. Make sure you complete your independent work. Make sure you complete the feedback form for me. Thank you very much and have yourselves a great day.